Taiwan's stock market sees its worst day ever, a reaction to Trump's tariffs. Meanwhile, the government tries to get opposition support for its tariff response measures. We look into why the recent deportations of Chinese spouses became a hot topic in Taiwan. Plus, how activists are trying to save cultural relics, centuries-old tombs. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. A bad day for markets in Asia. Stocks plunged as investors sold shares fearing a recession after U.S. President Donald Trump's massive tariff announcement. Tiffany Wong has more.
Down, down, down. Markets across Asia plummeted on Monday as investors fear a global recession after U.S. President Donald Trump announced heavy tariffs on 180 countries last week. Among those hit the hardest, Asian countries. Taiwan's Taiex had its worst day on record, closing under 20,000 points after a nearly 10% drop. Japan's Nikkei triggered a circuit breaker after dropping 8% in the morning, but closed at 7%. And the Shanghai and Hong Kong indexes also dropped in their first day of trading since the tariffs announcement, with the Hang Seng plunging a whopping 13% after a long weekend. As investors panicked, Trump shrugged off concerns.
Is there pain in the market? At some point, you're unwilling to tolerate this idea of a Trump put. Is there a threshold?
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something.
Trump's aides said that over 50 countries have sought talks with the White House to eliminate the tariffs. Taiwan's government has also responded, seeking to appease the U.S. after Trump slapped a 32% tariff on its exports. And its financial regulatory body also implemented temporary measures ahead of Monday's market opening, including massive limits on short selling, an attempt to keep traders from trying to profit from the uncertainty.
台湾证券交易所呼吁投资人给予我国的企业、政府信心，台湾产业的韧性，赋予我国政府的权力的资源，必能充分因应全球局势的 挑战，短期市场的波动应回归基本面的理性评估，审慎面对近期台股震荡的走势。
Despite the sharp fall, people in Taipei were optimistic that the Taiex's historic plunge would just be a brief fluctuation after the tariffs.
股票本来就是会涨涨跌跌啊，那 也是因为有这样的政策，才会在股票上面做反应。只是我觉得这不会是一个长期的状况了。
这个就是要看一个就是它的趋势了。哦，我想说，因为全世界的趋势都是这样的。那如果我们现在面对这个问题的话，我们政府的因应作为是什么？我觉得这是比较重要的。
But based on the dismal market performance on Monday, it's clear that many investors are worried about the economy. And if the market continues sinking, their worst fears may become reality. Andy Shi, Justin Wu, Leon Lien, Rick Lauert, and Tiffany Wong in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
For more on the fallout in regional markets, especially in Hong Kong and Taiwan, Chris Gordon spoke with Hong Kong-based financial analyst Gary Ng of Natixis.
Well, there's no sugarcoating it, Gary. It was a massacre out there today in Asia's stock markets, with every major index in the region seeing major losses, some in the double-digit percentages. What's your initial take on what you're seeing?
Well, I would say that the reaction hasn't really been a very big surprise to most of the investors, but it's just the scale of the tariff has been much larger than originally expected, of which the market may have been too optimistic before. So I think this is why we do see a lot of investors, they are turning towards the more risk-adverse approach, just trying to shield itself from tariff. So I think this is why we see money flowing into some of the Asian currencies, such as the yen, and also buying up the US Treasury as well as a safe haven.
You know, two of the biggest losers in stocks today were Taiwan's Taiex, which fell nearly 10%, and in Hong Kong, where you are, the Hang Seng Index lost over 13%. So why do you think that these two markets in particular were hit so hard?
Well, some of the sectors are really the major victims of Trump's policy on tariff. And of course, for the case of Taiwan, it is really a tech story that Taiwan has a very high reliance on U.S. export. We are talking about around 15% of Taiwan goods exported to the U.S. Every year, which is the second largest right below Vietnam in the region. And once we see all these policies being kicked in, even though we do see some exception in semiconductors, but a lot of smaller firms in Taiwan may still face this risk of the supply chain reshuffling, which there's uncertainties on whether they can export to the U.S. as usual. And if we move a bit towards Hong Kong, it is a financial story that even though the banking sector is not directly affected by tariff, but banks are very related to this macro story on economic growth. So if we do see a recession globally triggered by tariff, it's possible to see this shrinking net interest margin and also worsen asset quality in bank sector. But of course, for the case of Hong Kong, one extra point that we can see here is really this connection with China, that if there is any further escalation or retaliation happen between the US-China competition, the impact will simply be much higher than some of the other regional peers, such as Singapore.
Given all the panic, what do you think investors should be looking at as they try to navigate this?
I think the biggest, the most important point in the next 1 or 2 weeks is really about whether the U.S. will soften its stance on tariff to negotiate with other countries. Because I think if we do not really see that, it means that the U.S. is probably quite serious in using all this tariff measure to really forcefully bring back certain manufacturing capacity back to the country, even though it may make zero economic sense. So under that scenario, it's possible to see the global economic growth worsening further than what we already expect or reflected in the market.
That was Gary Ng, a financial analyst with Natixis based in Hong Kong. Trump's hefty tariffs have hit more than just Taiwan's stock market. Local manufacturers are already being told by their U.S. customers to suspend deliveries of their products.
客户当然他现在也是很紧张啊，就变成说要求说先那个停止出货啊，自己那个来付这个关税不可能嘛。
Taiwanese manufacturers of plumbing and hardware products say new 32% tariffs have made it unprofitable for their American customers to keep buying from them. The U.S. has long been a major market, with the industry exporting around $6 billion worth of goods there every year. That's roughly 10% of its total output. Now, local industry groups are calling the situation a disaster. Taiwan is working to overcome political divides as it seeks to pass plans to help local companies cope with the U.S.'s new 32% tariff. The cabinet has put forward a $2.7 billion aid package, and it's now up to the opposition-led legislature to give it the green light. Joyce Tseng reports.
An emergency meeting led by Taiwan's premier, which includes the heads of all three major parties. The goal, to unite across the political spectrum and safeguard the economy against the U.S.'s new 32% tariff on Taiwanese goods. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te already ruling out reciprocal action in a video address to the nation.
台湾没有计划采取关税报复，企业对美国的投资承诺，只要符合国家利益，也不会有任何改变。
Lai has put forward a 5-measure plan to deal with the U.S. tariffs, including negotiations, setting zero tariffs as the basis, as well as a $2.7 billion support package for local firms, proposed by the cabinet. The challenge now, getting the plan approved by the opposition-led legislature, which has been mired in partisan spats that have even turned physical in some cases. Tensions between the ruling Democratic Progressive Party and the main opposition Kuomintang apparent in the latest meeting. The task of rallying everyone together falling on Premier Zhuo Rongtai. Before the closed-door meeting, Kuomintang's caucus whip Fu Quinqi called out Lai's government for not being more prepared for Trump's 32% tariff, pointing to money saved by the KMT-led budget cuts that went through months of political wrangling, now as a lifeline.
因为国民党把不必要浪费的这些中央总预算把它节约下来，这些钱现在可以做第一波对所有国内产业的振兴。
The ruling party spokesperson, Justin Wu, slamming the Kuomintang statement, saying the opposition's budget cuts have been weakening the central government's capabilities to respond to something like the U.S. tariffs. The ruling party now looking for all parties to set aside political differences, to face Trump's tariffs head-on and fulfill a tall order set by President Lai of, quote, a golden age of shared prosperity with the United States. Fu Huahong and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policies are threatening the dreams of U.S. entrepreneurs like one who moved from Shanghai to sell Chinese wines in the U.S., but that's now at serious risk. Rosie Gweninger reports.
After spotting a gap in the market for Chinese wines, entrepreneur Camden Hawk decided to import bottles from boutique vineyards to the US. But just before her business officially launched, US President Donald Trump's fresh tariffs on China have threatened to upend the venture. Trump slapped Beijing with an additional 34% tariff, bringing the overall rate to 74%.
China going up to 74% is something that is so catastrophic for my brand new business that I think I might just have to wait and see. I think it's absolutely slowed my ability to order new pallets to come in.
Hawk spent 10 years in Shanghai, founding popular restaurants, when she noticed the increasing popularity of Chinese wines.
在我们门店的话，就是中国客户跟外国客户都对我们中国葡萄酒都有很好的反响。对。
Trump claims the tariffs will encourage U.S. consumers to buy more American-made goods and boost manufacturing, in turn supporting more domestic jobs. But Hawk says it's had the opposite effect for her, preventing her from living what she calls the American dream due to the heavy cost of the new import duties.
I can't think of a more ridiculous story that kind of flies in the face of what is seeming to be done by allowing these trade wars to happen. So you're not just keeping trade in your own country. I think that the illusion of creating more American jobs here by hampering the ability of us to do business it's just that, it's an illusion.
Financial experts have warned Trump's measures will lead to price increases in the US, something Hawk says domestic consumers may not be able to handle.
I've already been so shocked by the cost of living in America, even over 1 or 2 weeks, that if this leads to a recession and people don't have the ability to pay for everyday goods, let alone little luxuries like wine, or perhaps people like me, we consider wine an everyday good, I think that's going to be very, very tough for Americans.
China has hit back at the US with a raft of countermeasures, deepening the trade war between the world's two biggest economies. And as many other countries follow suit, US importers and consumers alike are feeling the pain of this decision in their wallets. Eason Pan and Rosie Gweninger for TaiwanPlus.
Today marks 36 years since pro-democracy activist Zhen Nanrong set himself on fire to resist arrest for publishing an alternative version of Taiwan's constitution, an act now seen as a powerful symbol of the country's fight for democracy and free speech. But the conversations around those freedoms are far from over. 3 Chinese influencers were recently expelled from Taiwan after posting pro-unification videos online. Their case has reignited debate over immigration rules for Chinese citizens and where to draw the line between free speech and propaganda for war. Cadence Quaranta reports.
Last month, a Chinese influencer living in Taiwan known as Yaya made headlines after immigration authorities revoked her residency permit over videos she posted on social media, which officials say advocate the unification of China and Taiwan by force. Yaya was ordered to leave Taiwan, where she has a Taiwanese husband and 3 children, and she departed just hours before her deportation deadline.
我不是因为自己认为错了而离开，是因为我尊重台湾的法律程序，所以我今天我会清清白白的离开。
The decision to revoke Yaya's residency was based on regulations governing Chinese citizens living in Taiwan. Those rules say a Chinese citizen can be ordered to leave if they threaten national security or social stability, which officials say Yaya did, with speech like this.
根据反分裂国家法第8条，台独分裂势力以任何名义、任何方式造成台湾从中国分裂出去的事实，国家得采取非和平方式及其他必要措施，捍卫国家主权和领土的完整。大陆武力统一台湾已经不需要其他的理由了呀。
Yaya defended herself, saying the decision violated her right to free speech, and later insisting that she never spoke in favor of unification by military force. But officials saw her remarks differently.
我们是针对他宣扬武力统一台湾的这个部分，那在我们看来，这个并不是言论自由的保障范围啊。大家知道，联合国政治与人权公约第20条，它就有说，所谓的鼓吹战争是禁止的。
Yaya's case and the cases of 2 other Chinese influencers who were also ordered to leave for similar reasons have sparked debate within Taiwan, even spilling over onto the streets. Many are angry at Yaya's comments and support the government's decision to force her to leave. But others have raised questions on the basis of free speech. This law professor says Taiwan's constitutional court rulings have set a precedent that for something to be outside the bounds of freedom of expression, it needs to pose a clear and present danger. Yaya's social media posts, he argues, didn't reach that level.
这个言论，其实我觉得它顶多就是大家不喜欢，它不会 lead to 武统，就有没有武统跟他讲这话一点关系都没有，一点关系都没有啊。他的 content 是不好的，我讨厌的。 我讨厌，但是言论自由就保障，你就有这个权。
Members of the opposition Kuomintang have also questioned the decision, as have 75 scholars who recently co-signed an open letter accusing the government of suppressing free speech. But others argue freedom of speech has nothing to do with this issue at all.
我觉得今天雅雅的问题，我认为它跟言论自由并没有关系，因为雅雅并没有因为她的言论遭受到我们的台湾的刑法的处分。 我们只是觉得，如果你是一个非中华民国的国民，然后你对于中华民国的这个民主政治完全不认同，甚至鼓吹希望中国用武力破坏台湾的民主自由，如果是这样子的话，我们认为你不适合在台湾依亲居留。
Li Mingzhe, a Taiwanese democracy activist, was imprisoned in China for 5 years on charges of subversion, believed to be because of statements he made online while he was in Taiwan. He says it's important to think about Yaya's case in the context of China, which claims Taiwan as its territory and has threatened to take Taiwan by force if it considers necessary, stepping up military drills around the country in recent years.
中国是一个对台湾一直保有侵略敌意，甚至他这种侵略不是光只有武力侵略，甚至有软实力的入侵，甚至有他的长臂管辖。所以我们必须要用这个来思考雅雅的言论行为对台湾民主自由的损害。
In the wake of these Chinese influencers' cases, several groups petitioned for stricter immigration policies for the Chinese spouses of Taiwanese citizens, asking the government to extend the number of years they need to live in Taiwan before they can naturalize. The cases also led to heated exchanges of words between the 2 sides of the Taiwan Strait at a time when relations are already tense. China's Taiwan Affairs Office accused Taipei of fabricating crimes to bully Chinese spouses and called its separation of cross-strait families inhumane. But in a statement, Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council, which manages relations with China, defended its decisions, saying they were made based on the law and that outsiders are not allowed to use Taiwan's freedom of speech to harm Taiwan. If the same thing happened in China, they said, these influencers would have long been arrested and sentenced, citing cases like that of democracy activist Li Mingzhe, as well as Li Yanhe, a Taiwan-based publisher known by his pen name Fu Cha, who published books critical of Beijing and was recently sentenced in China to 3 years in prison for inciting secession. By comparison, the council said, Chinese influencers who broke Taiwan's laws were simply forced to leave. Some, including human rights groups, are advocating for Taiwan to pass its own law, specifically outlawing hate speech or advocating for war.
但因为台湾现在还没有一个立法，所以我们人权团体在呼吁台湾政府赶快根据公约第20条的意旨，赶快立法来禁止这些言论。
那我不反对立个法去规范这种东西，但是你必须很小心去 precisely define what's so-called propaganda for war or racial hatred。必须很小心，要不然的话你就侵犯了言论自由啊。
Such a law may make future decisions clearer, leaving less room for debate. During this time, Taiwan has seen not just hatred directed towards the Chinese influencers who were expelled, but also towards Chinese citizens living in Taiwan generally, which government officials have been quick to denounce. Shi says this kind of turmoil could ultimately play into China's hands.
这个会不会它背后有一个恶意，就是说中共它利用这个个案，然后来制造台湾国内的各种的极化的对立跟冲突，然后造成人民的这一个彼此的仇视，那这个是要很小心的。
This all comes as Taiwan is facing what the government calls growing Chinese espionage, infiltration, and propaganda, and the question of how to combat these threats while preserving the nation's hard-won freedoms. Patrick Chen, John Su, Pichi Zhuang, and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
As people return to work after the Tomb Sweeping Festival, activists in the South are hoping the holiday will draw attention to their efforts to preserve Taiwan's historic cemeteries. By highlighting funerary traditions, they hope to safeguard Taiwan's heritage for future generations. Bryn Thomas has more.
Every spring, hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese people travel to their families' graves for the Qingming or Tomb Sweeping Festival.
在我们小时候，就是我爸就带我们来拜祖先呐，可能就是个惯性。那等到我长大了，我爸可能行动不方便，就我代替我爸他们来这样子。我觉得就是一个血缘的传承啦，对啊，就是一个汉族文化吧。
The annual tradition, a reminder that many Taiwanese customs originating in China once centered around ancestral veneration.
They come to places like this, Nanshan Cemetery in the southern city of Tainan. People have been building tombs here since the 17th century, and there's evidence that the place was a burial ground for indigenous Taiwanese long before that.
Because of local superstitions and beliefs, funeral traditions are a sensitive subject in Taiwan. But it's long been an interest of U.S. anthropologist and conservationist James Morris.
What this gives us is a really great composite of the material culture of Tainan and Tainan's history. So we have the old, this is probably granite or andesite, and this was used as ballast in the boats that were trading between Jinmen, Xiamen, and Tainan.
Alongside this tomb from 1642, the only one in Taiwan predating the fall of the Ming Dynasty, others span the Qing Dynasty, the Japanese colonial period, and through to today, each reflecting the artistic styles of the time and featuring the nation's top funerary artists.
那些彩绘名家大概就是现在被府城列为什么国宝人物，那种陈玉峰啦、蔡草如啊这些，他们都有帮忙画，可是他们画的都没有落款啊，因为他们觉得这个是所谓的面包案啊，够巴豆呀。
Today, like many Taiwanese cemeteries, Nanshan Cemetery is located on the edge of the city on real estate that used to be viewed as pretty undesirable. But if you look at its sandy soil, it's a clue to its past. This area used to be by the sea, and with some mountains nearby, that made for some pretty good feng shui.
The cemetery used to be enormous. You know, we are standing on a former beach on sand dunes. And during the Ming Dynasty, or during the Dutch period, during the Qing period, all of these older tombs had the luxury of being placed around in these very distant parts that had the perfect feng shui.
But even the most auspicious of locations has not been enough to save these relics of local history. Over the past 2 generations, many cemeteries in Taiwan have been demolished for urban development.
This is undeveloped land. There's no infrastructure below the ground. There's nothing above ground. You don't really have to pay people for rights to buy them out. So that's what makes this space so threatened, is that it's so easy for the city to see and award contracts for development.
Academics are confident that the oldest and grandest tombs in Nanshan Cemetery can be preserved by working with local historic organizations. But there's a risk of losing the tombs belonging to Taiwan's more marginalized groups.
今年又要庆祝府城300嘛，那你说这些小老百姓、小朋友的坟墓如果都拿掉，只保留那些那个有钱人家大家族的几门豪华大墓。就能够代表台南400或台南府城300嘛？我觉得这就没有代表性了。
As the people across Taiwan conclude their annual journey to honor their ancestors, historic groups and academics continue working to ensure these tombs remain for future generations. Patrick Chen, James Lin, and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, take a look at these dogs and their humans teaming up for an obstacle course race in Dubai. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.
I'm Joyce Dunn in Washington, D.C., and you're watching TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.